Hello again. The Practical Animal channel is dedicated to the public understanding of conservation, aiming to give students and career breakers tips that may just give you the edge you need to land that dream animal job. If you want to work with iconic animals, you need to have hope that you can contribute something. It's not all known, and later in this programme, we will be identifying knowledge gaps on cougars. To meet today's guest, we go to Los Angeles in California, USA. On January the 27th, 2020, authorities there were informed that a cougar, P56, radio collared in April 2017, had been killed. Korinna Domingo, aghast at P56's demise, founded the Cougar Conservancy. Her mission? To work with stakeholders to minimise human cougar and livestock cougar conflict in the state of California. She talks with me about the skills needed to work with cougars and humans, especially the need for communication between stakeholders. Cougars evolved 5 to 8 million years ago. Working with cougars and living the wildlife looks like this. Korinna, what's your best cougar fact, please?
They're agile athletes. They can jump up to 15 feet vertically at a standstill.
What jobs are there with cougars?
Wildlife biology or becoming a wildlife biologist is one of them. So that could be in the field or in the lab. You can get into genetics, molecular biology, wildlife diseases. You could become a statistician or a GIS analyst. You can also get into consulting, which is becoming more popular, policy and law. You can also be a science communicator with different backgrounds other than just the classic science. Also, I want to mention conservation photography is so important to cougar conservation.
What does your job involve, please?
I established the Cougar Conservancy in April 2020, which was a really pivotal moment that was brought on by a legal killing of a local mountain lion named P56 in the Los Angeles area, which really reverberated throughout the community. I wanted to create a resource outside of the state agency for supporting communities in living and recreating with cougars, but especially with regard to the reduction of conflicts that were occurring with domestic animals. So our overarching goals regarding human cougar relationships are really centered around achieving harmonious coexistence within these shared landscapes where people and cougars are sharing the landscapes together. So overall, my work is really characterized by a combination of conflict response, community engagement, education and outreach, multimedia production, and science communication, as well as monitoring and scientific research. It's really a dynamic setting, my day-to-day life, where I play a multifaceted role in advancing wildlife conservation efforts and coexistence efforts. And it's probably noteworthy that I do work remotely in a non-traditional setting, and I am alone most of the time.
What's the local attitude towards cougars?
The local attitude towards cougars where I'm based, which is in Los Angeles, tends to be fairly positive. Generally, Angelinos want to coexist with wildlife. However, the demographics that I work with on a day-to-day basis are actually folks that may have more doministic viewpoints of nature or more anthropocentric viewpoints of nature, and are experiencing conflicts with lions, whether those are perceived conflicts like, hey, there's a lion in my backyard, this is an issue, who's going to come translocate it, to actual issues like when cougars prey upon domestic animals. So it's varied, but I do work with folks across that spectrum of values.
That's interesting, actually. What is the attitude towards doing translocations?
Yeah, so translocations and relocations are often terms that are used by the public interchangeably. A lot of times when someone reaches out to us and they say, hey, there's a cougar that's been spotted in my neighborhood, who's going to come out and relocate this animal? And what they mean is they actually mean translocation. So a relocation is when you move an animal to an area within its home range or territory. So for example, that cougar in an avocado tree is relocated just about a mile or two up back to the mountain near where it was within its home range. But when people ask that question, they actually mean translocation. Can't you move this cougar somewhere else, somewhere outside of its home range or territory so that it's not our quote problem anymore? And what we do a lot at the Cougar Conservancy is really provide information on why we do not do translocation in wildlife management. With big cats, we've found that it's simply ineffective. Mountain lions and other large carnivores will just come back to their home range or territory, even if it's hundreds of miles away for where they were translocated to. There's also nowhere in California where you could translocate a lion where you're not also dropping it in somebody else's backyard or neighborhood. So it's really not a management tool that's effective in preventing conflicts. It would kind of just be a band-aid. The ultimate causes of conflicts a lot of times are unprotected domestic animals that are left outside unattended outdoors, wildlife attractants such as in the case of black bears, dirty barbecues, unsecure trash lids, things like that. And those are the things that we want to actually address more so than using translocation as a tool.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fascinating. Complicated, but fascinating. Korinna, how would you describe cougar conservation in the state of California today? Is the population static, increasing, decreasing?
Yeah, cougars are classified as a specially protected mammal under Proposition 117 in California, and that was passed in 1990, 2 years before I was born. In the 1990s, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is the state agency here responsible for managing the state's wildlife, they estimated there to be anywhere between 4,000 to 6,000 cougars populating the entire state. But they've since recognized that that is likely an overestimate of current occupancy. It was sort of a napkin calculation that was done way back when. And so researchers are currently compiling a bunch of data that hundreds of people have been responsible for collecting over the last few decades. And they're going to be releasing a new statewide and geographically specific estimate here in the next several months. But fast forward to 2019, select subpopulations in Southern California and along the Central Coast, they're currently a candidate under the state's Endangered Species Act. So not the federal in the US, but the state. So it's known as the California Endangered Species Act. It is important to recognize that population estimates are really only approximations. With mountain lions or with cougars, it's really hard to get solid numbers on this elusive and really wide-ranging species because in part because it doesn't have unique markings like a jaguar does, where they have those rosettes that we can kind of look at individuals. I won't get too far into that, but that's kind of where cougars are right now with policy, as well as kind of what's going on in Southern and Central Coastal California, where those subpopulations may be at risk of extinction.
Is the population in California fragmented, Korinna?
Yeah, so in Southern California, really a lot of the issues are habitat fragmentation that's caused by urbanization. So developments and roads have turned these nature preserves or once connected islands of habitat for cougars into these small green spaces that cougars can rarely escape. And so that makes it really likely for them to mate with their relatives, which is called inbreeding. They attack and kill each other at abnormally higher rates, and they do come into more contact with people and domestic animals in those shared spaces. And we know that human cougar interactions are often deadly for cougars. They result in depredation permits, vehicle collisions, poisoning, and poaching. And so getting back to what you were saying, John, with the population numbers, a lot of the issues in, say, the Santa Monica's or Santa Ana's here in SoCal, it's not that we don't have enough cougars. Those areas are at carrying capacity. Those landscapes can't support any additional cougars, but the health and viability of those populations that are isolated, you mentioned fragmentation, that's the issue, is that genetic variation or the genetic exchange with other populations isn't occurring at the rates that these populations need to be healthy.
What issues would you like to see resolved or questions answered regarding cougar conservation by the close of the 21st century?
I love this question because I don't get asked it a lot, John. There really are so many. And as a scientist and a data nerd, I could go on and on about this. So I'll try and be succinct. But for me and my work, I really think it's important that we establish a really good understanding of what non-lethal tools there are that are effective at reducing human cougar conflicts or cougar pet conflicts. What new tools can be developed or easily manufactured that are readily accessible to people, right? Not custom things that no one can have accessibility to, but what can be manufactured that the public can use that's easily available and can be deployed in various situations and scenarios. And so I know that, thinking 100, 200 years from now, tools aren't stagnant things. They are going to be adapted as society changes, as landscape changes, as human behavior and culture changes. So that's one thing I'd like to see, is more understanding about non-lethal conflict mitigation tools. And then secondly, and my last point, what is the cause of FLM? This is something happening with Florida panthers, which is also a cougar. Florida panthers are just a subspecies. They're called Puma concolor corii is their scientific name, and cougars is Puma concolor. But what we're talking about is the same animal. And in Florida, we're seeing Florida panthers and bobcats with these wobbly legs, and they can be debilitating. And the Florida panther, for those who are tuning in and not aware, they're actually listed as an endangered species. So there's a very small population of these animals. And so we're really needing to understand what is the cause of this FLM disease that we're seeing, and how can we manage this phenomena? Because it's such a small population, this is a big deal. And right now, scientists and managers in Florida are trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
FLM, Korinna, what does it stand for in cougars?
Feline leukomyopathy. It's or FLM for short, and it's a different characteristics and traits that they're observing through trail cameras and through direct observation, that their legs are becoming debilitated, and in some cases they can't walk, and in some videos panthers are dragging themselves across the landscape, which obviously is not going to render that animal successful at living and reproducing.
Korinna, what skills and personal qualities does a person need to work with cougars?
Yeah, I think I'll answer this question in the context of really what I do specifically, which is human cougar or human wildlife interactions work. Because I think a lot of folks, they hear the same talking points of what skills do scientists need, but with what I do, it's more at the crux of conservation biology, which is kind of the intersection of the science, the human dimensions, and social science, economics, and so on. And so one thing I'll say that's not talked about enough is self-awareness. Being self-aware is really a foundational skill that is going to indicate kind of your emotional intelligence. And this is really important for you to be adaptive, be an effective communicator in conflict scenarios, leads to good decision making, and ultimately allows you to navigate the complexities that are inherent in conflict work and all the nuances that go along with conservation and that conflict mitigation skills. The field of the human wildlife interactions is really intricate, and so self-awareness, a deep understanding of predator issues. You can know all you want about cougar biology and behavior, but knowing what the issues are currently and what they have been in the past is really important. And so human causes of mortality, and how that differs based on region. That'll give you a good perspective, I think, overall. Negotiation and conflict resolution is really important. So if you have an opportunity to take a course on that or a free webinar you can attend, that's super important. Public speaking and outreach is something that I do all the time, because community engagement is really at the core of the work that we're doing to enhance tolerance of mountain lions and understanding of the species and what we can do to coexist, of course, from a practical standpoint. Fieldwork and outdoor skills are also important.
Korinna, is your organization at all involved with cougars in captivity in a zoo situation, or during a soft release program, for example? And if so, does that require a whole different skill set?
So our organization doesn't necessarily work to home cougars that may, be of need for some reason or another to go into captivity from a wild animal to a captive animal. One thing that we did recently work on within the first year of our organization, a fire-burned lion, a lion that had been burned in the local bobcat fire in the San Gabriel Mountains. All 4 of her paws were badly burned and bleeding. And she ended up actually, with our conflict task force responding, we worked with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They came out there and chemically immobilized who we would call Monrovia, was her name. She ended up being the first mountain lion to be rescued, rehabilitated, and released in the state of California. And we did that within 6 months of becoming an organization. It was a great thing because it really showed that a 7-year-old lion, she was estimated to be about 7 years old, that an adult lion could be taken into captivity, be nursed back to health, and then be re-released and her live a successful life afterwards. In some cases where, some cases mountain lions aren't so lucky as Monrovia, and their injuries may be too bad. And sometimes the most ethical choice is to humanely euthanize that animal. We're not generally in that space, but that work that people are doing to house lions, especially kittens that are abandoned or orphaned, I guess is the best word, say when mama gets killed on the roadside or something like that. Those programs are crucial. And the Oakland Zoo has done just a phenomenal job on this in California. They've been taking in a lot of mountain lion kittens that have been orphaned, and they're finding them forever homes.
Which people, meetings, or books have most influenced your thinking about cougar conservation?
I really don't have a book or a specific person, I would say. I think that a lot of my passion for learning and for wildlife and science communication, it's going to be cheesy, but it comes from Steve Irwin and Bill Nye and watching them on the television as a kid. I grew up in the city when I wasn't scootering around with no parental supervision outside. I was in front of my television, and that was really my first connection to nature. My family didn't go out and hunt and bird and things like that. And so Steve Irwin and Bill Nye were really, I think, my first point of getting connected with wildlife conservation. But there are so many resources out there. So I would say feel free to get connected with me if you'd like recommendations on reading.
What should students wear for an interview, for an internship, for example?
This is an interesting question because I think it depends on the specific position you're going after. But overall, when considering appropriate attire for an interview, I think candidates should strive to just present themselves in a manner that conveys professionalism and respect for the opportunity being provided. At the same time, I don't want to push any kind of elitist ideology here, but I have noticed that using the word professional broadly kind of leaves it up to interpretation. And as a result of that, actually, with our volunteer programs, I've actually had to instill a loose company policy on how volunteers show up at events and during conflict visits, because those two attires are completely different. So when I'll speak for myself, though, for this question, when I'm in a professional situation, I usually wear a button-up shirt, even if it's a button-up shirt that is like outdoor material, like a hiking shirt. And my clothes aren't ripped or torn. I also have a clean appearance with both by the eye, but also by smell. And since doing human wildlife interactions work, I'm not going to lie, I've really planed down my appearance, not out of me wanting to, but out of the interest of the outcomes that I'm working towards, say during a situation where a mountain lion is at risk of being killed by a resident after a pet conflict. So I don't have piercings anymore on my, on my face. And I don't have hot pink anymore. And I don't think these things are unprofessional by any means. I'm pro tattoos, piercings, and crazy color hair in the workplace. But for me, I already have to deal with so much sexism and comments about my appearance because I am a young woman in a position of power when I show up on these sites. And often, I've been told, excuse me, who are you and what's your title? And when they see that I'm the director, sometimes they kind of have something snarky to say. And so I think that when there are things I'm willing to live without, like hot pink hair, if it allows me to save a cougar's life and have less distractions for my appearance, then that's something that I'm willing to do.
What are good questions that candidates can ask at interview?
Yeah, I think it's important for people seeking jobs to know that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So ask about company culture and values. Ask about professional development opportunities. Do they pay for you to go to conferences or take different training workshops? And can you gain certifications? Maybe if the pay especially isn't where you want it to be, what kind of perks can you potentially garner? And also, is there growth within the organization? Knowing day-to-day responsibilities, of course, is important, and knowing how your position contributes to the overall goals of the organization is important because everyone needs to know the big why, or else the day-to-day tasks are just that, right? They're just day-to-day tasks.
For students who really want to try and forge a career in cougar conservation, are there any books or journals they should be consulting?
So I don't have a favorite book or journal on cougars specifically to point people to, but I would say sign up for ResearchGate. I'm not paid as an influencer for this, but ResearchGate is where many researchers post their papers without a paywall, because we know that that's a big barrier for students or for early career professionals trying to get the information. It's behind a paywall. So sign up for ResearchGate and honestly, just get lost in the primary literature. Read one paper and then read the papers that they cite and dig deep into those materials. You can also read agency management plans. So for speaking with cougars in the United States, every state manages their own wildlife, and they often have reports on management plans and reports from various activities the agency is doing over the course of the year. You can also pick up Mark Elbrock's latest book. Again, I'm not being paid to say this, but he has a new book called Mammal Tracks and Sign. And this is a really comprehensive guide to tracking, the history of tracking, and cougar kill site investigation. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And I think you can even order used copies online if you poke around.
Korinna, where do our knowledge gaps lie regarding cougar conservation in the state of California?
So I think, when we think about addressing knowledge gaps, I think one, I would implore researchers to think about this interdisciplinarily. Is that a word? Is interdisciplinarily. But interdisciplinary research efforts and collaborating between researchers, land managers, nonprofits, especially indigenous communities, and other stakeholders. So really, we need everybody at the table when we're looking at our knowledge gaps, because sometimes, depending on where you're from and kind of what your interests and goals are, we're all going to have blind spots, and we can reduce those blind spots and increase kind of our understanding of the natural world and our relationship to it through having more perspectives at those decision-making tables. So I'll start there. But something I mentioned previously is disease and health. There is limited information we have on FLM that's affecting the panther population in the eastern US. So understanding what's going on there is essential for effective management and conservation efforts. We also need to know more about community perceptions and attitudes. So human dimension surveys, especially in areas where we're lacking that understanding, is really important, especially when informing coexistence efforts and educational programming. In the United States, each state is responsible for managing their own state's wildlife. And then we also have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is more federal oversight. I think right now we have so much great science going on, and we're establishing knowledge gaps within all these areas, but there's a need to connect those conversations and make sure that we're not doing management and conservation in silos. And so I think moving forward in the future, it's also communicating with one another among the different groups to overcome those silos that may be occurring, and ensuring that there's a cohesive effort and really an efficient approach to cougar conservation countrywide and not just on the state level. And then secondly, a lot of things that well, let me start that again. In addition, if you're following cougar conservation in the US, you will see that occasionally a cougar makes a headline because they're over in some other state where we don't have established cougar population. So some are moving from the west and they're dispersing eastward, where if you're not familiar, we eradicated cougars from the entire eastern seaboard post-colonization. And so sometimes we see a cougar making its way back east, and what we call this is, we call it natural recolonization. And so as we see more of these lions moving eastward, I think it's really important for us to understand and address the barriers to recolonization. And those states that are working in the west where they're having those lions, those dispersers are coming from those states, ensuring that we understand those barriers like habitat fragmentation and human development and other barriers to dispersal, such as roads and agricultural landscapes. And understanding those barriers is really essential for us to understand recolonization more. And then research is needed to inform the policies and practices that are going to be aimed at facilitating recolonization while minimizing conflicts and promoting conservation at the same time.
Korinna, can you suggest a research topic for an undergraduate project, please?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of students every year, from undergraduate students to graduate students that are working on various projects. And I won't make it so easy for you. I would challenge students to think holistically about their project and how that project can actually make a tangible impact, and not just do science for science sake. However, a disclaimer, I know that it isn't always feasible given the constraints of timelines for courses, deliverables, resources, and real knowledge gaps that you may have at that stage in your career. But as an example, one thing that I did in community college is I started a project with my local city, the city of Burbank, and they had I asked them, what are their interests? What knowledge gaps do they have? And they had real gaps about wildlife activity, including the activity of cougars in their Stowe Canyon nature area boundary. And so I helped fill some of those gaps using remote cameras, and I shared that information in collaboration with the city to the community at large. We also had a social media component where I did some social media posts to also reach those online who may not be recreating on the trails themselves or likely to visit the nature center. We still collaborate years later on educational programming for the city, and they really see us as a resource when they have a question about cougars or a behavior they spot on camera. They know that they can always reach out back to us. And so that project really established a long-term relationship and plan that they could implement moving forward that just keeps on giving. But I want all students to know that you can make an impact now. Don't feel like you have to wait and go through all these courses and you have to get a master's and jump through all these hoops that you think you need to jump through, or that people tell you you need to jump through. And begin considering how you can make an impact now in the field or in your community. And since you are from England and in England right now, John, don't let the muggles get you down. You can make an impact today.
Korinna, what early career goals can you suggest for people who want to work with cougars as a career?
Get out there and get involved. Gather a diverse set of skills. Get a strong background, of course, if you can, or you're interested in it, in science, and scientific research is helpful. So when I was in college, I did make a decision really early on, sometimes to sacrifice grades in lieu of being outside till 3 a.m. capturing North American porcupines and outfitting, them with some VHF collars. I took advantage of whatever field opportunities that were available to me. And one way that you can do this is you can introduce yourself to graduate students who may be working on a project in the field or in the laboratory, and see where you may be able to lend a hand. Don't just hop on a project and then go to another project just to put something on your CV. So I see this as a big mistake a lot. Really get to know the ins and outs of whatever project you're choosing to spend some time with. What are you doing, and why is it so important that you're doing that? So, for example, I worked on a project in my undergrad doing black bear hair snare stations in an area of California. So why are you helping to build those hair snare stations to collect hair for black bears for genetic research? What are the goals of that research, and who's funding that research? And what lab techniques are used to analyze the genetic data once you go out as a tech or a volunteer and pluck that hair and put it in that manila envelope? How are those results going to end up being used in management, if at all? Know about the project that you're working on and get that in-depth knowledge. I think it's really clear in interviews or when speaking to early career professionals, when they're doing the project to bolster the CV thing. Really get to know, I think, what you're doing and why you're doing it as a volunteer. And I will say that, volunteering is hard work, and we shouldn't have to do it as much. Our field really should be better funded, and projects, when possible, and project leaders, when writing grant proposals, they really should be creating items for stipend volunteers or tech work. So there is a barrier in that sense. And I do want to acknowledge that volunteering does come with a burden, and it can lead to exclusions in our field. It can hinder diversity efforts. But I do want to disclaim, as I'm saying this, is I've been on my own since I was 17 years old. I worked full-time while going to school for the majority of my undergraduate career, while balancing volunteer and schoolwork. It was brutal, but I knew that I had to set myself up for success. And I knew that this field is so competitive that I couldn't wait to graduate to pick up some of those skills. I'll do a blast session. So surprising and fun skills that you can pick up that may lead you to land a field gig is learn how to drive an ATV, work on cars. If you know how to change a tire, put that on your CV. Drive a vehicle in uneven terrain and get that experience on your CV. Learn how to tree climb. That's especially important for cougar captures, because if you're a tree climber and you can get up there and hoist that cougar down, that's a huge plus on your resume. Also, shooting and aiming. If you want to help with chemical immobilization efforts, when that cougar's in that tree, could you potentially help chemically immobilize it? First aid certifications, wilderness first aid, if you can afford it or have a company pay for it for you. Get rabies vaccinated. Same thing. If you can afford it yourself or ask a project to fund that for you, you can then work on carnivore projects and get hands-on with these animals. Gain experience in community engagement, curriculum development, communication, de-escalation techniques. There are free online workshops.
Korinna, is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I just really appreciate the opportunity to come on this podcast and connect with your viewers. I want everybody to know that I'm a resource for them. And so feel free to reach out to me anytime. Our website's cougarconservancy.org. You'll find me on our website. And we can always talk shop about cougars or wildlife careers. And I just want everybody to know that no matter where you come from or what career path you're taking or have taken in the past, your experiences are valid. You are welcome in this field. You are part of the community. And feel free to connect anytime, whether it's through email, and you can connect with us on social media as well. And thank you, John, for having me.
Thank you. Korinna, you are the founder and director of the Cougar Conservancy in California in the US. Thank you very much indeed for being on the Practical Animal channel. Korinna Domingo.